Yeah, so I'm guessing we'll go ahead and give Melissa just a few minutes. I'm pretty sure, I don't know what's going on, but she'll be able to jump in. I know something's going on with her computer. I don't know. Karen, would you like to sing a song for us just to get us started?
I would not like to sing a song, but thank you for
Okay.
the offer.
What about drop some bars?
Right.
Yeah, that's not my date. That's not Nehemiah. That's a different thing. So I think I'll keep
Right,
those.
No doubt.
That's awesome.
All right, I think we are live on YouTube. So I'll
All
just
right.
go ahead and give a couple of just nuts and bolts for today. So thanks to everyone who is calling in here or who is tuning in on Zoom. Thank you to everyone who is joining us on YouTube. Please, if you're watching on YouTube, also share the link to your Facebook or any other social media pages so we can make sure that we're getting this broadcast as many people as possible. My name is Karen Reese. I'm the Vice President of Research and Education. I'll just be getting us started here. So you know how to interact. There is, if you are on Zoom, there is a chat window. You can feel free to chat. There's a drop-down menu that should allow you to speak to other panelists, and also allow you to speak to attendees. So you can put a chat in there. If you would like to ask a question, we can't guarantee that we'll get the questions with all the panelists since we just have an hour today, but we will do our best to get to you with our questions. And if we don't, we will get your questions to our panelists and we will try to put together some answers. If you are not already on the Justified Anger, if you're not already on the Justified Anger mailing list, I suggest that you subscribe to that. We will post any answers or any follow-up to our mailing list, and then we'll also post it on Facebook, so you can find us there. If you do have a question for the panelists, it's better if you use the Q&A box as opposed to the chat box. We'll be able to see the questions in the Q&A box much easier. If you're on YouTube, feel free to also type your any comments or questions, or just talk to each other in the chat box, and we'll do our best to pull questions from there as well. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Anthony Cooper, Nehemiah's Vice President of Reentry Services and Strategic Partnerships.
Hey, thank you so much, Karen. Really appreciate you. And again, Tanya and Rudy, I want to thank you both for being here. I think Melissa is having some difficulties as far as getting on. So, but I know she'll jump in when she can. Just want to share a little bit about both of these phenomenal people. And now that I just think about Rudy, I still kind of remember the first time when I met you. I remember the first time I met you, I think you were selling your book, which was just really phenomenal. I remember, I believe I purchased 2 of your books so far. Rudy Bankston is a committed educator, entrepreneur, restorative justice practitioner, and writer. His powerful story describes his experience as a survivor of the school to prison pipeline. So I'm just going to kind of jump into a little bit of both y'all, just a tad bit here. And then Tanya Kraege, making sure I'm saying that correctly. Also, she is a APSW, a CSAC, MSW, C-card coach, C-card trainer, PSS trainer, and a drug poisoning prevention team supervisor at Safe Communities. Again, I want to say thank you both for logging on. Thank you, Melissa, as well. So let's go ahead and just get to it. One of the things, and this is, I guess, really, this is a question for both of you, whoever decides to chime in first, just if you could just tell the audience about yourself, please.
Go, Rudy.
I think Rudy was saying ladies first. I
kind of read his mind
in that. I read his mind in that. So,
See how patriarchy work right there?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I'm just grateful to be called a lady today. So my name is Tanya Kraege, as Anthony did state very well. I have the unique opportunity, I think, to talk about the work that I get to do. And I say I get to do it because it is a gift. I'm grateful for it. But I also was a person that was incarcerated for, periods of time throughout my life. And so I can speak to some of the challenges and difficulties that I saw there. And I work with individuals coming back into the community and trying to help them with whatever their needs are, working with a support person, a peer person that also usually knows what it's like to have had the challenges of having incarceration and then trying to get a job and be a parent and find housing if they don't have it, all the challenges that come along with, what society says you have to do when you now have, these new charges hanging over your head, or you haven't been able to necessarily move on from those reasons. So I bring those two worlds together. So with the compassion and empathy and understanding of what that's like, as well as I get to see a lot of hope with the people that are dedicated to working with people in reentry, whether that be Nehemiah or the reentry coordinator at our Dane County Jail here, but also understanding that there's still a long way that we could be going and doing in our communities to help make sure that knowing that people, when they go away, they're coming back, and how do we help them be successful? That's really what I set out to help them do. So.
Awesome, phenomenal. Hey, Rudy, so I see Melissa just chimed in. Melissa, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Perfect, and we can hear you too. So
I made
awesome.
it. I made it.
You made it. Yeah, yeah. I just tried singing. That was a real bad attempt. Don't judge me on that. So I just wanted to just give a quick blurb about Melissa. Melissa Ludin. That's it.
Ludin. Close.
All right. Ludin. All right, thank you. Sorry. Is currently the regional organizer campaign for smart justice at ACLU of Wisconsin, an effort focused on reducing the U.S. jail and prison population by 50%, combating racial disparities in the criminal justice system. Thank you again for being here, and thank you for all the wonderful work that you do as well. And so I was just asking, basically, if you can just kind of give our audience a little bit more about you and the work that you are currently doing.
Okay, sure. Thank you again for having me, and I apologize for that brief delay.
No problem.
When you can't get into your email and nothing else is working. So again, thank you. So just a little bit about myself. I got involved in this work, and I want to say it's probably going on 4 years now, 3.5. I quit the line of work I was involved in to do this work. I was initially working for Network Health in prior authorization for Medicare hospitalization procedures. And the reason I got involved and wanted to get involved with this is because a close friend of mine had passed away. And at that time, for anybody, and I'm also somebody who's formerly incarcerated from the age of 19 to 24. I came home in 2007. Stigmas then were just, this wasn't a discussion we were really having, I want to say even 10 years ago, or really 5 years ago in the capacity that we're having it now. But for me, it was, I wanted to do more than just helping women behind the scene. And I think I wanted to see what we were doing in the state of Wisconsin specifically for women and discussing the issues that surround women and women's incarceration. And that's where I went to an expo event, a panel event in May, and got acquainted and met some people and kind of started getting things rolling. And so I met a lot of powerful people over these last few years. There's been a lot of different things that we've, certainly all worked on, but most importantly, bringing the issue of women's incarceration, predominantly the prison experience, and really discussing what I've seen a lot of Black and brown women endure and what they're getting incarcerated for.
Awesome. So, Mr. Rudy Bankston, I know I kind of already went over a brief blurb about you, but if you can please tell us a little bit more about your work and currently what you're doing now.
So I grew up in Milwaukee, but at the age of 18, I was arrested and sentenced to prison. Sentenced to a life sentence in prison. And while in prison, one of the main jobs that I would take on, actually two, was that of a librarian, because I love reading and love books, and that as a tutor. And during my experience as a tutor, while continuing to fight for my freedom, I was just running into a lot of gifts in the men that I encountered, and a lot of organically certain tools came from that on how to convince men who were doing forever in prison that education was still important. And it would be beautiful to see like this natural progression with people. Also, several folks did it for me while I was in there, but it always came with kind of these were guys who had all these and were discovering a lot of these gifts, but were stuck in a prison cell and the world not really being able to benefit in their communities and families. So, and I went in 95 and I did 20 years, and my case finally got back in court in 2015. And I came home, and one of the things that I really wanted to do was focus on prevention versus intervention. Like, how can we connect with young people and really elevate their gifts and really help them to understand a lot of what I didn't understand and my peers didn't understand. So in 2015, when my sentence was reduced, I ended up moving to Madison and getting in the school district here and started doing a lot of restorative justice work that developed in the restorative justice work through an anti-racist lens, because a lot of what I learned about myself, a lot of the reading I did while in prison, coming face to face with a lot of what I didn't understand as a child in this school district, really like waking that up. And I think at the root of it was around a lot of folks, a lot of us as human beings not really understanding history and how it's showing up in everything we do. So I started doing restorative justice work. I continue to do it. I'm a practitioner through it. And I work with students and staff and adults, and also work, some of my most rewarding work is in the juvenile justice system, where I do work with mainly young people and try to bring in education that's really relevant to them and they see value in. And again, adults get hard, but young people who feel like someone really believes in them, they open up and always surprise you in some beautiful ways. So that's the short version that I can give right now.
Yeah, well, thank you. And again, I want to thank all of you all. I'll probably say it a million times, but just I appreciate the fact that you all took out the time of your day. We're all busy doing the work that what we're doing out in the community. Just appreciate all three of you. So Melissa, I know really a lot of your work is really focused on women. And so I want to, and I feel that the community kind of hears some of the stuff about that, but not enough. Don't really talk about, I don't really feel enough people in our community really knows what goes on inside the institution and things of that nature and the different trials and tribulations that may happen. So I was just going to ask if you can share that, but then also, if you could just go ahead and share that, I think that would be good before I get too deep into stuff. Yeah, I got a bunch of stuff in my mind that I want to kind of ask, but go ahead, please.
Yeah, absolutely. I first want to add, I think, the stigma with any woman coming out and saying she's been in prison is high. It's almost like saying, you're a tainted person, you're a tainted woman. And that's something I also want to lead with, that's certainly not the case. Me, growing up in Appleton, Wisconsin, a predominantly white community, going in and spending time at Educator around a lot of Black and brown women who grew up in different areas and different neighborhoods than what I did. It was definitely a learning experience, but it was really important for me to not only take a look at, okay, why am I here? But I wanted to get to know the people I was around, because when I started to see and hear a lot of these women were serving significant sentences for drug convictions, drug crimes, I wanted to know more of what happened. And the way that I like to share that is relationship building and bridge building. And for me, that started being incarcerated. It wasn't easy. I'm a white woman, right? So who am I? What am I about? But it took time. And so in building that bridge to build trust allowed me to get many of them to open up, to talk about a lot of the backgrounds and things that they came from many women who experienced sexual assault at a young age, didn't necessarily have both their parents, growing up with a grandmother. It was really eye-opening for me to see, like, first of all, why are we incarcerating these women for these drug crimes for this significant amount of time? You're talking many, many years. Even for some women who are there for homicide, who took plea bargains in cases where I really thought, like, I mean, it was just, you know, you're slamming a lot of these women. And really, I think anytime anybody mentions the war on drugs, especially the 1994 crime bill, Black and brown women were hit the most. They were slammed. We still have women serving sentences at Techeetah for 69 years, life sentence basically for, you know, crack cocaine or cocaine then. But also too, like we, in the early 90s, you know, the youngest person that the state of Wisconsin ever incarcerated was a young Black woman, a girl. She was 13 years old. They charged her with life imprisonment for party to crime to a homicide. And the judge in her case felt like because she didn't show any type of emotion, which we know as trauma today, that her boyfriend was 19, she was old enough to make the decision to be with a 19-year-old. So she's old enough to know what she took part in. And so she's still serving a life sentence today. I mean, she's my age, 37. And we're still trying to make sure that she can come home. But even too, just taking a look at, you know, what a lot of Black and brown women go through. I mean, it's very dehumanizing as a woman, I think, to be in prison. A lot of the stuff designed, you know, we talk about all the time. I mean, this is a system designed to break you down. This was a system designed to basically hold people, not necessarily address why anybody goes there. But for Black women, you know, just seeing, like, it's when you're stripped of your womanhood, I even too, to see as Black women, I mean, you lose your hair, there's different things. You're not always able to take care of, you know, your skin, you know, all those things, all, you know, the hygiene and nice things that we have out here. And, you know, you're left in this environment, as they say, to try to find your way and rebuild yourself. But you can't do that when they stripped you and broke you down. So.
But thank you for sharing that. So Tanya, just want to see, what do you, I mean, what are your thoughts in relation to this?
To the treatment of women and incarceration. So
also the population that you work with on a day-to-day basis, right? So, you know, just what are your thoughts, and what are, you know, because I will say, I know for a fact that because you've heard some of these stories before, and you've seen people come out and do well. Also, you know people who are in. So, yeah, how do you feel?
So I think a big part of using my own privilege has been to talk a little bit about, and I've just been dipping my toes in this because it's not only my story, it's my child's story, right? And so so I have to be cognizant of, like, how does this affect my child that was born in prison? You know, I was in Techeetah and I had a baby 4 3/4 of a year ago. And I think that even me being in, like, the best of circumstances, it was the most traumatic thing I've ever experienced in my life. I've been through, you know, multiple rapes and other things, and I would take those over having a child in prison. And the things that I saw personally are, they have a male doctor contracted to work with all of the women who are pregnant in there. 80% or higher of most of us that are there have significant trauma histories, and a male doctor should not be the one contracted to work with any women. So I had to advocate really with the mental health providers, like, I can't go see this male, like, I don't want to see a man. And I had to write, like, the warden and all of that stuff. And then, you know, the experience of having a child in there is you get 24 hours, like exactly 24 hours with your child. And at 24 hours, your child is taken away from your arms and either put in the system in CPS, or, you know, a family member takes them. I was in the position at the time where I was married, and he took, you know, the baby home with them. And then some women that were pregnant in there, because we all kind of hung out together. We had this shared experience of being pregnant and being incarcerated, and being in the dorms at Techeetah, that we all had a little different, experiences based on that. So some of the women that I was with didn't get to see their babies the entire time that they were incarcerated because they were put into the system. So they didn't get to visit with them. They didn't get to see them. They maybe got pictures of them if they were fortunate enough to the foster family that they were placed with that would send pictures. We were not allowed to breastfeed. We weren't allowed to send our milk out. That was important to me. I was able to, because I was a social worker prior to going to prison, I knew a little bit about resources in the community for people that I was already helping. So I knew that there's like the Mother's Milk Alliance where you could have donated milk given to your baby. So I shared that resource with the other women there that were concerned about the fact that they're not going to be able to give their children breast milk. They didn't make visits a priority for you to be able to see your baby. They had this house, but while I was there, that house was shut down. Even women who had older children weren't allowed to see their children for time period because there were cuts to the budget. And so usually the first cuts to budgets are any programming. And so that program was cut off during the time that I was there. So women weren't able to see their older children or their babies as often as if they could. There were instances of all the time the COs yelling at us. And one CO, I finally said, like, most of these women were like yelled at their whole life and punched and hit and all that other stuff by men. And he was open to hearing this. And he was like, I didn't know. And I was like, thank you for listening. But most of the other people are just like, sit down and shut up. I don't want to hear anything that you have to say and you're not important to me. So the shame, the guilt, the stigma that I had was, and I still struggle with it today, is I had a baby in prison. And here I am, and learning to understand that that's a part of my story. And seeing the gifts in that above it all. I've had lots of therapy, lots of help, lots of support, but I haven't really been able to talk about it all that much because there's a stigma, like Melissa was sharing already, of a woman being incarcerated, a woman who's even already a mother being incarcerated. And then you have a woman that is a mother already and had a baby in prison. But I made a vow to myself when I went through that experience that I would use that experience to help other women in the future. And so I'm getting there into that space where I think I've healed enough where I can begin to talk about it in other arenas and start advocating. But again, there's that piece to, how do I protect my child? She doesn't understand yet, and me having the conversation with her about what this means for her, that she's not bad, she didn't do anything wrong, things like that. So what I see oftentimes with, in our community, I've been blessed with the opportunity to work with a team that is a peer support or peer specialists or recovery coaches that go into the jail. Currently, because of COVID, we can't go into the jail. So we've set up like a phone line so people can call out and connect with their person. And that has changed significantly. When COVID hit, we had like 250 people released in like a 2-day time period. And so the jail reentry coordinators didn't have enough time to like find housing for all these people. So like the housing consortium was like overwhelmed. Our coaches were overwhelmed, and they're like empathic, and they've been through this and they know how difficult it is overall getting out of jail or prison, that like they were just feeling so helpless and hopeless that they didn't have a place to help these people go to. And there were certain community agencies around here that were graciously enough, but they didn't have enough beds for 200 plus people. So it was really hard to support people during that time, and it still is. There's always a lack of housing. You look at the challenges of having a record, of any type, particularly if it had anything to do with felony and, possession of drugs. In Dane County, you pretty much can't get a place to live. And if you have those types of records, unless you find somebody that out of the goodness of their heart, they happen to have a place to rent to people, or somebody that knows somebody. And not everybody knows somebody that knows somebody. And so you have people, lying on rental applications, having somebody else get a place for them to live or co-sign, and then they move in under that. And that's a lot, and then you have to have like super, good credit score. I don't know anybody that comes out of incarceration that has a good credit score, unless they just were fortunate enough to not have anybody mess with their credit or have any other bills compiling up while they are incarcerated. So it's a lot of different things. It's like, how do you help them get a job? And I think Dane County, they are less stigmatized in the way of you have a history, a criminal history. I still think that we have some work to do, obviously, but if you go into rural Wisconsin, it's a lot different. And so I think here there are places that have programs that if they hire people that have histories, you know, they get a kickback, and they generally, to my knowledge, treat people well. They treat their employees well. But that's not always the case. That's few and far between. And of course, they can't take 500 people that were incarcerated before. So there's not always job placements for those people. So helping people find, you know, good jobs, well enough paying jobs where they can actually support their family, and they probably owe child support from being away for however long. And then that's another challenge, helping people maneuver through the court system, helping them be able to see their children. You know, if their significant other has been like, well, you were gone, it was used against me, I got a divorce, I don't even have 50% placement of my child, because he used the fact that I was in prison for 8 months of her life. I was there for 14 months, but that I was there for 8 months of her life, that I don't even get my daughter for 50% of the time, because that judge looked at me as like, you're not adequate. Well, I have my other daughter full time. So, you know, it's just, there's a lot of challenges, and I think a lot of shame that comes along with it. And so if you have a history of substance use disorder and that was your coping skill, and you might've gotten some new skills while you were incarcerated,
Yeah,
you're probably going to revert to your old coping skills because you have like the world on your shoulders.
Yes, for some people, it's definitely easier to go back to that. But then also there are quite a few people that I would say that with the right support system and things of that nature, that's so far behind them. But something that I do want to be able to put out there is the fact that, and I see this with men and women, is the fact that once you have served your time, when does that actually end?
Never. I'm done with it, yes.
So a lot of us that who have done time, and you know, whether if you have a support system or not, it seems as though like that part of you is always going to be there. And so the more and more as we continue to go forward, as we're trying to change policies and things of that nature, I think it's really great that we're at some point we're showing people what it can look like when your life has changed with the right support, and also when you're being able to do something different in your life. So one of the things that also, so I wanted to make sure, I know time is gonna go quick or whatever. So I want to thank you both for being able to really just being boldly honest and just really just putting things out there. And I really feel that, you know, people needed to hear that. Something that I want to kind of chime in as far as like with Rudy. I know one of the, pretty much you focus on education and the school to prison pipeline. From your perspective, what keeps this pipeline going, and what's the root cause? You're on mute. Thank
that
you.
happens at least twice a week.
I know the feeling.
No doubt. I think at the root of, I think all these systems is white supremacy culture, and not really understanding how it continues to show up and harm people across racial lines. And it becomes difficult sometimes it's really difficult to see it as a culture and how people show up and care for communities. In education, what I see a lot is just this punitive stance when dealing with students and adults. So the expectation is to have caring adults who care without really caring for their well-being, and it trickles down to how they engage the students. And at the root of that is this fear, this ongoing fear. And you have a lot of institutional fear, and the part of that is because people don't really gather in spaces and get to know each other, and help and learn how they are in historical relationship with one another. Whether it's around race, whether it's around gender, whatever it's around. And again, so much that's in the prison system, even what Melissa and Tanya was the things that they were describing, like it shows up in education, and it's almost eerie, because I have the benefit of having both lens. But when I was younger, when I was encountering this stuff, when I was trying to figure out how to navigate race, when no one never really talked to me about race in a way that will give me a language that will help me form an analysis, and through that analysis I can learn to advocate for myself. So I didn't have much of a language, and so that can be within the community when there's the internalized racism that developed, and then when I went into these school buildings and whiteness was centered. If you did not achieve like this, then you're less than.
Yeah.
And then you have a lot of educators in those spaces who have not dealt with their own stuff. And when I was going to school, we were being bussed. And we were being bussed into environments that it was this constant reminder of you're showing up best in. And it was so subtle that I could not put a finger on it, but I knew it did not feel welcome. It did not nourish my soul. And what I was left with was a bunch of frustration. And it became this notion of us versus them. And a part of my story, you mentioned I'm a survivor of the school to prison pipeline, because a part of my story in middle school, I was arrested for getting caught with a fake gun that wasn't even on school grounds, but they came and arrested me. And they arrested me. I told them where the gun was at my home. They saw it was fake, but I was still expelled from school. I was put in an alternative program, which is often just holding places that standards go out the door then. And I formed a new peer group. And this new peer group was other young people who felt just as isolated and withdrawn from society and just as harmed and traumatized as I was. And that really just shifted the whole trajectory of my life. And to analyze, to really think, and again, I had 20 years to like, how the hell did I end up in prison with a life sentence?
Wow.
And then seeing so many other brothers show up in prison and have similar stories, many stories that were worse, but have so much potential. And then to come home and to end up in a school system where you seeing this 20 years later replicated. And I can give credit that people are starting to have the conversation around race and around whiteness, but I also think that many folks feel like we have to, the question is, we have to fix students of color versus we have to fix this system and really disrupt and dismantle it in the way that it is today and radically reimagine how we can do it differently. And the struggle is often you have folks even in the juvenile justice system where in order to work there, it's almost like you have to deny the harm that it's doing. And who's being sacrificed by that, where you can work within a system but still have a critical lens on that system and recognize we got to do this better though. And when someone from the outside comes in and say, hey, this has caused me harm or is causing harm, not feeling like you have to wedge your identity to a system that's causing harm, so you always have to be on the defensive about it. And I think the more folks really begin to interrogate everything we are doing, a sister named Aisha Wynn, she wrote a book, Justice on Both Sides, and and it's rooted in restorative justice through an anti-racist lens. But she gives 4 pedagogical stances. And she said every educator should take this look at education through this lens, and I would bring it out to the broader society. She says race matters, justice matters, history matters, and language matters. Language is at the core. How do we describe the young people we deal with at risk? We constantly, I heard that at risk, or how do we not take what the choices they may have made, or even trauma, and how do we create language that infuses life into young people, but also infuses a asset-based versus a deficit-based lens when educators are working. Because if I'm an educator, particularly a white educator, and my mind is being filled with all this negative data about at-risk students of color, and then they say, go in the classroom and teach that person of color, that student of color. The problem is, as I'm being conditioned to watch that student behaviorally and less how to support that student academically. And no one is helping to unpack that piece. So there's the more blatant forms of harm that's being done, but there's this notion of spirit murderer that Patina Love talks about that's happening every day in education. And I think that has to be really investigated and looked into and disrupted in order to disrupt that school to prison pipeline.
Oh, yeah, that's brother. That's. Oh man, it just made me even think about my own youth, and even at times when the times I may have backed out and was a knucklehead to certain things, and how the response was, right, and what could have happened during those times. So one of the other questions, and this is a question to all of you, and again, Rudy, I just want to say thank you for what you've shared. Thank you all for just really just laying it all on the line and just being bluntly honest, and that's what we need. And also, and that all three of you are also putting action behind it. So just want to say thank you all for the work that you do, and I appreciate that. So also another question, so based on what you've shared, what is the most important thing we should focus on to reduce mass incarceration, racial disparities in the criminal justice system? I know it's kind of a loaded question, so if you know what I mean, right? I mean, it's kind of like you know what I mean, and I think one of the things about that question is really just to be able to grab snippets, because all of us have been incarcerated, right? So, but being able to just think about what are some of the things that need to change, and really being able to put those things out there, I think is important for people to hear. I mean, I feel like I talk a lot, so I try to make sure I want people to hear from people that some people may know you that's on the line, and some people may not. So I would really like for people to hear it come from you all. Right. Okay. Go ahead, shoot. I mean, don't really shoot me, but but at the same time.
Right. Just to even speak, I think even when we go back and understand, like, slavery evolved into mass incarceration, especially when we take a look at that 1994 crime bill. That move was straight for Bill Clinton's votes. And a lot of the states were given incentives to build and create prisons, hence why we have truth in sentencing. And with him admitting that it failed, that it was a big failure. We have to look at, the system. I mean, it's, the system of mass incarceration, is built with racism, and we can talk about it all day to dismantle. But at the same time, when we talk about law enforcement, like my colleague Sean says, is the first contact a person has, is that law enforcement officer. If we take a look at starting from there with people getting arrested, put into the system, as soon as they get into the system, they lose, civically, they die civically. So at the same time, I think it's also looking at, we take a lot of plea bargains, and I don't think people really understand or see, 94% of plea bargains in a state, or we have 94% plea bargains in each state. And what that means is somebody's taking a plea bargain in a case. I can even share myself for an example. I was scared and being told that if I took my case to trial, that my victim's medical records would be exploited and I would get a significant amount of time. This is what happens with a lot of Black and brown people, thinking that, I don't want to admit to something, but I don't want to have to get a life sentence over something so small. So here's this and I'll take this. And there's something to be said for that, because that's part of your constitutional right to take something to trial. But when we're moved away like that, even on the federal side, 97% of federal cases end up with plea bargains. And so we take a look at how law enforcement is today with police brutality. You know, how many of these people are getting rounded up with charges that are really innocent? How many people do we really have in the state of Wisconsin that are in our prison system that are really innocent? And so that's where I think the conversation has moved to, because in my line of work of what Sean and I from the ACL do is, you know, we want to end crimeless revocation, which is the driver. And that's somebody commits a rule violation. You know, they move from one house to the next. They may switch a job. They may get a credit card. And they're being revocated. And, you know, we had 45% of those people get sent back to prison in 2017 because of that. So it's really taking a look at the frontline end, but at the center of all of, you know, like with what Rudy talks about, the work Tanya does, we have to address racism. It's in all of our systems, healthcare to school, law enforcement to incarceration, even in corporate. And we have to call it out and start dismantling that from there.
Anyone else want to go ahead and take a shot? I don't know if Rudy's frozen. I think Rudy's frozen.
I'm not frozen.
Okay. I was like, I thought you were frozen. I'm sorry. Yeah. So anyone else want to take a shot at it, or?
I just saw Tanya take her mute off. So did you want to get in there, or?
No, I mean, I just think that there's so much, you know.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Rudy, please share.
Yeah. I don't have the magic pill, silver bullet answer, and I don't pretend to. And I think it's important for openness in terms of like, it's hard to become convinced that you have the answers and this is what it is. And that dogmatic stance is what breaks down relationships in terms of the relationships that needs to be formed. And it's certain things you have to take a hard stand on. When young people are being harmed, when the community is being harmed, you have to take a hard stand on it, but you have to keep everyone's humanity centered in that. And I think what often happens is that it instantly becomes us over here and them over there. And that's how white supremacy works. White supremacy thrives off of division. And white supremacy doesn't have a color, it is a mindset. And it's certain cultural characteristics in there that really doesn't allow community to become a place of healing, to allow institutions like education to become a place of healing. But when I do restorative justice work, and you have the reactive space in there where you're responding to a harm, but you also have the proactive, which is deep community building. And it's three components of restorative justice that I hold in my practice. And one is creating, building healthy relationships, building and sustaining healthy relationships. That's like center right there, because we have to communicate and to build these relationships. But then it's creating just and equitable learning environments in education. That can be in any institution. And when we say creating just and equitable learning environments, justice in the sense of making sure you have primary justice, which is making sure everyone gets what they need to be successful, to feel a sense of life and belonging. So you have that component, but the third component, which is more reactive, is repairing harm and transforming conflict. But recognizing that conflict will be there. And if we take care of the relationships, we take care of making sure everyone is honored and dignified in a space, conflict will shrink, but it will never go away. But you begin to look at conflict as a way for us to deepen. But one of the protocols of white supremacy culture is conflict avoidance. We don't do conflict. So how we view conflict is almost like we either avoid it, which it poisons the atmosphere, or you take a more restorative approach saying, oh, this is a conflict, meaning two people or two groups care about something deeply. How can we bring them together and deepen that into something else that we can all live with? And I think humanizing that process at the center of everything we do, and keeping one another's humanity at the center of everything we do, even when we disagree deeply, I think is key. And also starting in terms of incarceration, the incarceration of people started way before someone got arrested. It's this notion that someone belongs in jail, someone doesn't belong in this this society. Someone doesn't belong in this community. Someone needs to be policed. And that is a mindset that lives in the classroom, in a teacher's brain when they're encountering students of color, in healthcare, and every institution, I think, in America. So that disruption has to be really intentional, but it cannot be from a dogmatic standpoint. It has to be from the standpoint of how do we bring human beings together to have conversations, to really understand history and how they are showing up from their respective places, again, whether it's gender, race, or whatever, how those dynamics came into being, and how to disrupt the harm because through that happens through our conditioners. Because systems don't harm people, people harm people, but also systems will not heal people. I think building community will start to bring about that healing process more than anything. And systems is too vague. It's like that's that over there, and not necessarily what do I need to disrupt right within myself, and right within the institution that I'm working in.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. So something I think I wanted to just add as far as, because I don't want to say if, when we are actually more involved in the system, that's when we're able to navigate it and make it what it should be. I'm talking about people with lived experience, people who understand the different challenges and really understand that there's more than one way to be able to fix this problem. Because when we look at any system, it really drives off of a business plan in one way, one form or another. That's just my personal opinion. And so when you look at a business plan, in many business plans, it has been tweaked to be able, to meet certain expectations. So how do we continue to tweak things to make sure not to only, we want to be able to build people up. We want to be able to do things the right way, but also because the evidence is already there, what we've been doing wrong, what the system has done wrong. So it's just, and that's again, one of those, that's a whole nother session of the stuff that how that really does need to be broke down. Tanya, I'm sorry, I think, were you about to say something?
Well, I think Rudy said it way more eloquently than I did, but I was also thinking the other day, like, where do we begin? Like, it starts so much earlier than, even teenage years. And I grew up in communities personally where Black History Month was a thing that, like, we celebrated and we talked about. And so I got my history from a different lens than maybe a lot of other white kids would get. And I think that intersectionality, health equity, like talking about all these things from a younger age to really see that each other as a human being outside of whatever systems are bearing down on us. I personally feel oppressed by most systems that when I'm within them, I don't want to say anything because I'm afraid of retaliation. And so it's usually like once I've like worked my way out of that system, which we know many people can't work their way out of the system for whatever reason, they have barrier upon barrier. So they never feel like they have a voice or they can't find their voice. And I think that that's a problem, not giving them a platform to be able to talk about those things. But I think creating space to bring people to the table that are affected by the systems more often than a bunch of other people that think they know about the system talking about the system, like nothing about us without us. And so if we're talking about substance use disorder, if we're talking about people that have criminal histories, if we're talking about what's going to work well for all these different populations, it should be the populations that are affected by those systems at those tables, so that they can talk about the change.
Something I was just thinking about this as well. And this is probably, really is a question for everyone, of being able to just see, are there other groups out there that you all may know that are working on women, on Black women issues? Are there other groups that are just working on that Black women issues that may have been incarcerated, right? Melissa, I know you're throughout the whole state of Wisconsin. Same thing for Tanya, and same thing for Rudy. So are there targeted organizations that we can probably making sure that we can get links to be able to share the work and stuff that what they're doing. And the same thing for you, Rudy, as well, whether if it's Black women that have been incarcerated, but then also other organizations that are, especially in some of these rural communities, because I get the from the emails to the letters, or sometimes phone calls, people are saying, hey, there's nothing out here, is there, understand, is the only work that if you're going to help us, do I have to come to Madison, right? Or do I have to come to Milwaukee, or so on? I live way in, I'm trying to think of a small town, Rio, Wisconsin. Hopefully I said that right, Rio. Yeah. So, so I mean, is there other organizations that who you all feel like, for one, need to be also incorporated in these conversations? Because again, this is a state that we live in. We also have to make sure that we're getting the word out all the way around the board. Because in order for us to do the work that we all are doing, we need community, and to be able to extend as much as possible.
All right, so I can go. Hopefully you won't hear my kids screaming. So 3 boys at home.
Yeah.
So we have 2. And if I am wrong, please somebody correct me on that. But we have 2 organizations that work for women throughout the state of Wisconsin, and there's something to be said for that, because we need more. So you have Alice Powser that has the Demeter Foundation. She was the first person to have an organization specifically for women for years. Then I was happy to co-found a campaign under Wisdom and Expo called Free. So that campaign is specifically to address the needs of women incarcerated throughout our state, in prison and in jail. I believe one of the things that they're trying to work on is the housing piece. So I'll be happy to leave in the information on how and who to contact for those who may know Tamara Oman or Sarah Ferber. Those are going to be the best 2 to get connected. I know that LaToya Greer and there's another person that works under that campaign. So for those in Madison, please reach out to LaToya Greer. But it's important because we don't have enough. And I think when we talk about reentry, the prison system was never designed to do anything with reentry. I mean, let's be honest. It was to keep a cycle continuously moving. And so for a lot of us, it's up to us to develop that. But I also think that there needs to be something specifically put together that focuses on the Black and brown women in our system in Wisconsin.
Those are the 2 that I was going to mention too. I mean, I know local ones like Mom and then Just Bakery. It's not women specific, but they do help lots of people get back on their feet and feel cared about.
How about you, Rudy?
In terms of just women, or in general?
I guess I want to say focus on women, but then also if there's some other organizations, because again, this is something that we talk about in our organization quite a bit, is the fact that we're nonprofit, but our focus is the community. The state of Wisconsin is our community, regardless if people like it or not. If we're working in incarceration, the brothers and sisters who are coming home, they are our community. We have to embrace them as much as possible. We were once them for many of us, and also to be able to, if there are ways of being able to connect the dots, we have to do that. It's not something that we forced to think about. We have to do that as much as possible. So again, I think in asking that question, it was kind of targeted towards women, Black women, but then also I do want to talk about other organizations who are trying to connect the dots as well, as we are all doing here. So
yeah, being in this is not like sarcasm or anything, but I think education has to take the lead in that as well, and be really and I really appreciate Melissa and Tanya's lifting up Black and brown women, because particularly Black girls right now in education are being criminalized at an alarming rate. They're being viewed as less innocent, more adult-like, and this is mindset. You know what I mean? But I think that support has to live in this small group of parents who've not formed a actual organization, but they are devout in their support of women and girls in our community, and just lifting them up too, because sometimes when it becomes a part of a institution, and those institutions are dependent on funding, and that fund, you don't want to piss off your funders, then you begin to water down your approach, and you don't call it how you see it. And if you don't call it how you see it, then it's not going to get done. And so I think more so pouring more resources into the community, and again, supporting educators, supporting teachers, because when you talk about black and brown students and young people in general, they're one of their first encounters with a consistent interfacing with white American racism is within school. And if that school and in that education system is constantly spirit murdering, and then they graduate to down that pipeline into these juvenile justice centers, and you have some devoted folks working in these need to be supported. And my feeling is those who are most vulnerable deserve the most resources. Not for standards to be lowered, but to pour more resources in. So if you are running a juvenile detention center, put some of the best, most creative, most socially aware, anti-racist teachers in there, because you have young people showing up in a state of deep confusion around a lot of things in their life that it's not their responsibility on. You know what I mean? So I just think really looking beyond institutions, but also holding institutions accountable to the community. With that said, I would say, of course, shout out to Nehemiah. You know that y'all were the first ones I touched base with when I hit the community up here. Freedom Inc. Shout out to them, you know, because they are vocal, they are bold, and a lot of folks want respective approaches to dealing with oppression, but they are unapologetically, no, you're not going to oppress us and then tell us how to struggle. You know what I mean? And then often folks like the Y and the Time Bank. So it's a lot. Moses, the ACLU, all these different organizations. But I think it's important that the community holds them accountable, because ego comes in. Social activist bullying happens in Madison like crazy. But we have to keep all these institutions to hold them accountable to the needs of the community. And when people start to posture for funding and things like that, that's when the community has to say, nah, y'all are losing y'all way with what y'all started with. And I think if you're really for the people, you're going to take that criticism and do better. And I think as human beings, we all need those folks to hold us accountable and be willing to listen, and knowing that constructive criticism is coming from a place of love, not contempt or trying to control.
Amen, brother. Hey, again, so we're coming up on that time. We got about a minute left, so I'll make it quick. Again, I wanted to say thank you, all of you for taking all the time for being here. I want to thank the people who had chimed in, whether was it you on YouTube or on Zoom. Appreciate every single last one of you. We are still doing our reentry conference. We have some more things that we will be sharing on our Facebook page, as well as our Nehemiah page. We do have another lunch and learn that will be coming up here soon. So I'll make sure we'll get those dates out to you. Just peace and blessings. Y'all have a wonderful day. Please enjoy some of this beautiful weather. At some point I will. But yeah, so thank you again. All right. Y'all have a great day. Thanks a lot, JP.
Thank y'all.
Peace.